Glass Onion on John Lennon, and this is John Lennon albums ranked, part 1 of 2. Now, we'll talk about that in a second, but a few other bits of business. So the last episode, 53, which had the 3 listeners to the show featured on it, has become the second most popular episode in the history of Glass Onion within a week, which is very heartening. There was a sudden spike at the weekend, and I did have a quick look at the stats, and I found that there were a few hundred hits from a place called Amherst. NH must be New Hampshire, I guess, in the USA. So if there's anyone from Amherst, I don't know if it was a college or something and it got passed around there, but if anyone from Amherst would like to contact me and tell me how they discovered the show, that would be great. So glassonionpod@yahoo.com. I've also done a couple more guest episodes, and they will all be coming out, I imagine, in a kind of a flurry in the second half of October. I'll let you know when they're out, and I'll put links on the Facebook and Twitter pages. But it's interesting, I'm finding with this podcast as well, and doing those guest appearances, I'm repeating a few anecdotes and opinions and that kind of thing. And it's a real challenge to try and make it sound different each time. And of course that reminded me of what I was saying in the outro of the last episode about, the Sean Lennon, Paul McCartney interview, and the way that Paul, for example, will tell the anecdote about the song Just Fun, which was one of the early Lennon-McCartney ones that they rejected. But then he'd embellish it by playing it on the guitar. So just adding that little bit extra. And I've been trying to do that myself. But I must say now I sympathise with Paul. And I also sympathise with one of my guests who brought out a book last year and has been doing the rounds, as they say, doing presentations, interviews, podcasts. And he's having to try and tell the story differently or repeat the same story but try and retain the same energy. I mean, I was talking to someone about this the other day. Virtually all jobs include repetition. And me as an English teacher, I was reminded of when I worked in Bologna in Italy. The school had a good idea where the same class would be repeated in the morning or the evening, so the students had the option of joining the morning or evening class. And I used to share that with another teacher, so you'd tell the other teacher what you did, so they did exactly the same. But in the end, perhaps because of a shortage of teachers, I ended up teaching both classes. So essentially I was doing an identical class, but I used it as a creative exercise. It was really interesting to try and make it different and make it new, but still imparting the same information. So that's been a good challenge. I've had a number of reviews recently, and I'm going to read a few of those. So Kate's Bush, which is a fantastic name, says, excellent. Just listened to the episode with 3 listeners on, and they were very well selected, each of them interesting and enlightening. Maybe an option to do more in that vein? Not that you need deflecting from the general excellence of the normal shows, quote unquote. Had to give you 5-star review when hearing some miserable sod gave you 2. Who on earth does that after all your hard work? You give us great pleasure, so keep it up, please. Fantastic review there from Kate. I bet that's not your real name, but maybe it is, Get in touch in any case. So the end of that was a reference to me moaning about someone giving me a 2-star rating. My rationale being that you should tell me what I'm doing wrong before you give me a bad rating. Give me a chance to put it right first. In terms of doing more of the listener episodes, I may well do that, yes. I am probably going to do, before the end of the year, a listener questions. And what I could do is get people to record their questions. That might be nice. Give their name and record their questions. And I may well do more listener interviews in the future. I'm open to anything. It's just that I do have a long list already of people I've contacted and shows that I've kind of planned. So when that would happen, I'm not sure. But like I say, probably listener questions before the end of the year. Another review, I think this is Paul Baxter. And he just said, sorry I haven't been in touch lately. I've had a lot going on, but still managing to keep up with the podcast and still loving it. All the best, Paul. So thanks for that. And then the last one is from Australia, Paul K. I can't imagine who that could be. Could be someone from episode 53, perhaps. A great show. Antony has the best Beatles-related podcast. All fans should tune in and enjoy. Superb commentary. Brilliant guests, which of course includes him. Well, they didn't say that. And a complete lack of crummy, self-serving, attempted humour. How rare in podcasts. Keep up the output, please. Cheers, Paul. That was, of course, Paul Kellingley, who was on the last show. So, yep, always warms my heart to read those. And I get a lot of messages nowadays from different parts of the world. And I do look at the stats every now and again, and I'm always particularly interested in seeing where people are listening from, and I've recently had listeners from Saudi Arabia, and I think it was Nicaragua or somewhere in Central America, I remember. So interesting. Nobody from North Korea as yet, but you never know. Another thing I wanted to talk about actually was people in the Beatle world talk occasionally about the fact that John Lennon didn't play on a few George Harrison songs. And there's an idea that, maybe he shunned them or, was not interested. And I think that's true of the song I Me Mine. From listening to the Naga reels, you can clearly hear, John and Paul are both taking the piss out of it, basically, this sort of Spanish-style waltz. And John seemed pretty uninterested in playing on that song. But I did decide to do a little bit of investigative work here. That sounds way loftier than what I actually did. To see how many songs he didn't play on and what were the reasons for that. To see whether he did actually shun George's compositions. So George Harrison actually wrote 22 songs for the Beatles, excluding ones that were credited to all four, which I think is only Flying and Dig It. But yeah, 22 Harry songs, you might say. So I'm actually going to go through these, and I'm going to tell you what John Lennon played on them. I'm going to go quickly, so it won't take too long. I'm going by the BeatlesBible.com, which is run by Joe Gooden, whose book, Riding So High, was reviewed by myself and Tom Hunyadi in episodes 49 and 50. So Don't Bother Me, he played rhythm guitar and tambourine. I Need You, acoustic guitar, vocals, snare drum. You Like Me Too Much, acoustic guitar, electric piano, tambourine. Think for Yourself, Vox organ, harmony vocals, tambourine. If I Needed Someone, rhythm guitar and harmony vocals. And then Taxman, backing vocals. So up to that point, which is the Revolver sessions, John is contributing fully, playing a bit of guitar and some vocals and a little bit of percussion. On Taxman, it's only backing vocals, but of course we know that Paul took over the lead guitar. So I think, again, from the Naga reels, it really confirmed that although John perhaps wasn't in great shape at that time in January 69, he clearly, I think anyway, was the inferior musician of the main three, John, Paul and George. Technically, we know that he did contribute some key stuff to other songs. For example, the harmonium on We Can Work It Out, or that great Django Reinhardt-esque solo on Honey Pie, which is another great example of John Lennon's memorable minimalism, because there's only about 15 or 16 notes or something in that solo. It's very short, but it's very memorable. So Love You Too. I don't know why everyone always pronounces that Love You Too, because it's only got one O. That's the English teacher in me coming out. He didn't play on that. Paul actually played bass and did backing vocals on that. Ringo did tambourine, and George did acoustic guitar and electric guitar. So essentially, George just replaced John as the second guitarist, a rhythm guitarist, let's say. I Want to Tell You, backing vocals, tambourine, hand claps, Within You, Without You, nothing. But again, there were no other Beatles on that. Bizarrely, according to the website, Neil Aspinall played the tambura. Lucky him. So he got on that song and none of the Beatles did. Only a Northern Song, piano, glockenspiel effects, Blue Jay Way, backing vocals. There was no guitar in that song. There was just George playing the organ. So again, there's a fairly valid reason why John wasn't on that. It's All Too Much, lead guitar, harmony vocals, The Inner Light, backing vocals, and there were no other instruments played by any of the other Beatles. It was just George and the Indian musicians. While My Guitar Gently Weeps, rhythm guitar. I'm always plugging Ably House or Ably House, ABLY House YouTube channel, who do these brilliant reproductions, trying to use the original instruments when they can, doing a split screen of the bass, the drums, and they're really brilliant players and trying to be as faithful as possible. And I recommend the one about While My Guitar Gently Weeps, because John's playing a rhythm guitar there and he's doubling the bass at some point, and Paul is playing mostly chords, in fact, on the bass. So just constant innovation at all times. Piggy's Tape Loops, again, the only guitar on that is George playing acoustic guitar. And now we get to the meat of it really. Long, 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 he didn't play on. And Savoy Truffle, he didn't play on. Those are White Album songs. I'm Your Mine, as I mentioned earlier. And then For You Blue, lap steel guitar. Probably seen the video for that. Old Brown Shoe, this one's a little bit contested, I think. Up till recently, the story had been that John had a guitar part that they wiped. So again, he was willing to play on that song. He didn't shun it at all. Now, I think it's since the Abby Rhodes book has come out that accompanied the 50th anniversary package last year. Now it's John on backing vocals and piano and Paul McCartney on drums. I don't know, if you listen back to Old Brown Shoe, I'm not buying that that's Paul McCartney on drums. Perhaps I'm wrong, perhaps there's cast iron evidence, but there's a little bit of revisionism going on about who played what, and I'm not buying all of it, because there's some very signature Ringo moves in that song. So I don't know whether Paul was doing an impression of Ringo, but if anyone can tell me for definite about that, I'd definitely like to know. Something he played the piano, sort of almost mixed out, but you can hear it a little bit there. And then Here Comes the Sun, he played nothing on it, but He'd had that car accident in that Golspie in Scotland. So again, valid reason. So really, this thing about John shunning George's songs, other than I Me Mine, really just comes down to two songs, Long, Long, Long and Savoy Truffle. And I had a little look at Chip Madinger's Lennonology book, and Savoy Truffle and Long, Long, Long were both recorded around the same time, early October. But John was around the studio in between those sessions, because those sessions for those two songs ran from the 3rd to the 14th of October, various sessions and overdubs, etc. I mean, they did 67 takes of Long, Long, Long. I think we could probably say now that I'll do my impression of it, oh, at the end of Long, Long, Long. Did you enjoy that, everybody? With famously the bottle of Blue Nun on the top of the piano. It starts wobbling. Brilliant. I think we can say that's almost certainly not Yoko, since John wasn't at the session, so almost certainly Yoko wasn't either. Just as a sidebar, the podcast Fabcast, which I really enjoy, they came up with a great theory that Savoy Truffle is obviously, Beatles fans will know, it's name checks lots of chocolates, and it's about Eric Clapton's sweet tooth. But they said it was a metaphor for hard drugs, that, the chocolates, the indulgence was a metaphor for heroin. That's a good theory, that one. I like it. So yeah, why was he not on these songs? And I did message Chip Madinger, and he said that he probably wasn't needed, and go back to what I said a minute ago. I think John's ability to contribute to the others instrumentally was limited. He definitely could have been on Savoy Truffle or Long, Long, Long doing harmony vocals, backing vocals, but perhaps wasn't required. Who knows? There could be other reasons. Couldn't find anything concrete. So anyway, just to say, it's one of those things that when you drill down to it and research it a bit, you might find that the popular opinion isn't right. But as ever, I always say, happy to be proved wrong or told some information that I didn't know, because this is a constant learning thing. And even though the facts of the Beatles story haven't necessarily changed because the events have already happened, in a sense they are ever changing, because we're learning more about it and we're learning details we didn't know, and we're learning that things were different. Case in point being who played what on Beatles records, because it's still not decided, Dear Prudence, the drum part, is that all Paul? Did Ringo come in and do that complicated bit at the end? Again, anytime anyone's got anything definitive or something they've recently found out, please write to me, because I always want to increase my knowledge or enhance my knowledge, keep the Beatles knowledge muscle flexed, so to speak. And on that terrible metaphor, let's talk about today's show. So this is, as I said, part 1. I explained in the intro to the main part of the show exactly what we're doing, but it's John Lennon albums ranked, but expanded out to include that band he was in. I can't remember their name, but, that one in the 60s. That skiffle band. So my guests, Kit O'Toole and Ken McNab, both very familiar names, I'm sure, to the Beatles community. I nearly said family then. They were both on the show last year, as I mentioned. Ken wrote And in the End, The Last Days of the Beatles, and that's what I was referring to earlier when I said that he's been doing lots of promotional interviews for that and having to keep it fresh. And Kit O'Toole is very well known. She has the podcast Talk More Talk, and she's also a Beatles and Michael Jackson, in fact, author. They're both fantastic, knowledgeable, insightful, and very upbeat. Ken has a wonderful turn of phrase. I mean, he is a journalist, so he should really. But there was a great atmosphere to this talk. We really enjoyed it. So part 1 here is counting down to the top 10, and then part 2, which will be out very shortly, will be the top 10. Anyway, I'll mention that again in the outro, but for now, I'm going to let you get on with listening, and I'll be back on the other side with a few words. Enjoy. Hello everybody, welcome to Glass Onion episode 54, and this is the second of 2 quote-unquote birthday shows for Mr. Lennon's posthumous 80th birthday on October the 9th. And today's episode fits snugly in the genre of ranking episodes. People generally do it in reverse order, I think, because it cranks up the tension, But today I came up with quite a crazy idea. Well, it's not a crazy idea to rank John Lennon albums from worst to best, but with a little twist, I've included Beatles albums, as in John Lennon's contributions to Beatles albums. And I don't want to bog everyone down with rules, but we also said we could consider the singles that came out around the same time. So, for example, Day Tripper could go with Rubber Soul, and I Feel Fine could go with Beatles for Sale. And then the other thing we said was with the 1980 recordings, which became Double Fancy and Milk and Honey. We actually did this last year, and we talked about 1980. I've sort of put those together to make a fantasy John Lennon album, because to be honest, that's what I would have liked to have come out. I'd be happy for Yoko to bring her album out as well, but I'd like to have, if we could go back, to have had them separate. But anyway, I'm absolutely delighted to have two guests with me today, two people who have already been on the show last year. And first of all, Queen of all Beatles media, Kit O'Toole. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Anthony. Thanks for having me back. This will be, I think, a very interesting discussion today.
Yeah, has it been lots of fun getting ready?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had much sleep, and but, you know, I've got my choices locked in, for better or for worse.
Okay, I'll be quickly changing mine while you're talking. And also I've got Ken McNab, author of And in the End, the seminal Beatles tome of last year. Ken, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Anthony. Thanks very much for having me on. I thought maybe that once would have been enough for you, but here we are, delighted to be back. I can just echo what Kit was saying, really. You know, I'm surrounded here by a blizzard of papers and sheaths of notes and lots of revision. I think I was revising up until the last few minutes. So, one heck of a challenge.
What I said to you on the message, we won't find a definitive answer, but we'll have some fun not finding it. So with the rules established, let's get straight to it. So what we're going to do, we've got 19 albums. I've considered Magical Mystery Tour, but I haven't considered Yellow Submarine. We've taken John's one song from Yellow Submarine, which was Hey Bulldog, and we've kind of incorporated that into White Album. So what we're going to do, we'll get fairly quickly to the top 10. So Kit, can you give us 19 to 15, please?
Okay, well, just briefly, before I mention that, I just want to mention the criteria that I used because it was really hard to figure this out. So I just went by, first of all, the songwriting quality. I looked at whether I felt the songs were groundbreaking, you know, in any way. Did they have a timeless quality? You know, are they still being played today? Do they still hold up? Were they influential in any way? Of course, the vocals and the overall production. So those were the general criteria that I used. Okay.
Thanks for doing that, by the way, because that was part of my introduction to ask you both the technique.
So I just wanted to see so that when I go through my list and people say, what was she thinking? That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. With me, I was just going to say that I had a sort of technique, which was to take out the mediocre ones and see how many good to great ones we had left, because as you said when we were preparing this, it's the quantity over quality is the problem, isn't it?
Exactly.
So that's what I've kind of gone with. I've also included covers, so with some of the early ones like Twist and Shout, I mean that would bring that album up quite a bit in my estimation. But
exactly. Yep.
Anyway, go for it. Right.
Okay, so number 19, Sometime in New York City. I just always felt this was not his high point. I think it's just dated. Great intentions behind it, but the songwriting just was not on point. It just grates on me to hear it.
It's half an album as well, isn't it? It's half
exactly.
an album. Yeah.
Exactly. So this next one will probably be a little controversial, but the rock and roll album has always been a big disappointment to me. It just could have been so much better. I think it's the production that does it for me, you know, and it was during the Lost Weekend, and sometimes I think his voice shows it. And when Paul McCartney's Run Devil Run came out, I thought that's what the rock and roll album should have been, you know, clean production, and it just was so disappointing. Okay, then the next one, you know, this was a tough call, Magical Mystery Tour, because while it has I Am the Walrus, I mean, it's wonderful, but that's pretty much it.
Flying,
yeah, I mean, it's not great. And so I thought, well, one song, I just thought I can't really rank it that high. Boy, that was a tough call. Oh, my goodness. I love I Am the Walrus. Incredible songwriting. And then 16, Let It Be. You know, not his finest moment in songwriting, with the exceptions across the universe, of course. Although I never liked that Phil Spector production of it. You know, I always thought it needed to be simple. I would have loved to have heard him re-record it with just like him and the guitar. I've Got a Feeling, co-written with Paul. That's a great one. One After 909, I mean, is kind of fun and historically important because it's one of the earliest compositions. Don't Let Me Down is good. I wouldn't rank it among his best.
Oh, really?
I don't know. I don't know if I'd rank it among his absolute best, but Billy Preston's keyboards are incredible on that. And The Ballad of John and Yoko, is fun. I guess I've never really also considered that among his absolute best. I mean, it's almost, I hate to say novelty song. I don't mean to dismiss it, but it's just kind of a fun timepiece maybe. And of course, you know my name, look up the number, genius. No, I'm just kidding.
I love it. I think for what it does, you know, it's great. That's a weird one because the instruments were all done in 67 and the vocals done in 69, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of a weird one in placing it, you know. So, I mean, there are some nice bits in there, but again, not on the whole his best moments in songwriting. Okay, and then last one, number 15, and again, I'm sure I'm going to get some, this will be a little controversial, but I'm getting a solo one in here, Mind Games. This has never been a real strong album for me solo-wise. It's just a little uneven. Mind Games, of course, great song, no question. But after that, it just gets a little, as I said, inconsistent for me. The videocast I co-host, Talk More Talk, we did a show on this album recently and had a really interesting discussion on it. And a number of us kind of agreed on it, that we kind of ranked it mid-level in his solo albums, that it just, you know, has, you know, Tight As, it's wonderful. I mean, great jam. It has some nice moments like that, Out the Blue.
One day at a time.
Yeah, and, you know, there's some nice moments on it, but as a whole, it just doesn't hang together like some of his other works did, which we'll get to later.
And half a great album.
And so, you know, we just felt like it just kind of ranked in the middle in his work. So,
all right, cool.
Those are my choices.
Yeah, that's the 15. All right, Ken, same, 19 to 15.
Well, like Kit went for songs and albums that created a sort of mood and a lasting impact. You know, the songs that were instrumental in defining a mood for me when I was growing up and even now. So I went for number 19, same as Kit actually. I went for Sometime in New York City. You know, it's a follow-up to Imagine, but you can't imagine, no pun intended, to have gone from such a high to really mediocrity in one fell swoop. I mean, it's like rock and roll journalism rather than an album as such. It does have some nice moments on it, but it's not even so much a political observation. You know, I think the politics of it would have upset some people on this side of the pond. But, you know, an artist is entitled to write about what he feels like. But the songs didn't quite, none of them really have any durability to them. I mean, I quite like Luck of the Irish as a nice ballady folk song. And I also quite like Sunday Bloody Sunday as a track. But perhaps the sentiments were slightly naive at the time. I mean, he's quite entitled to hold his beliefs, but typical of John, you know, he would hold them one day and then maybe 6, 8, 9 months later would retreat from those beliefs out of some guilt complex. So I've never really been a great fan of Sometime in New York City, even as I say, songs like, you know, New York City is a good track. But somehow or other, they just seemed a bit out of time, really. And for 18, I'm going to go for Mind Games. I agree with much of what Kit was saying about the album. I think the album catches them in a moment where inspiration seems to have been somewhat lacking. There's not an awful lot of upbeat in the album. You know, One Day at a Time is quite a nice song. I don't know why he sang it falsetto. I actually would prefer, I think there's a version where he doesn't sing it falsetto, which actually sounds nicer.
I haven't heard
Good point.
And I've never really been a huge fan of Mind Games as a track. I don't know why. Maybe because familiarity has bred just a little bit of contempt. Intuition, Out of the Blue, they're almost good tracks. Maybe he needed an editor or somebody to maybe tweak some of the words or the tunes. I wonder who that could possibly have been.
Oh, I wonder.
For number 17, controversially, I've gone for Beatles for Sale. Now, there's quite a lot of revisionism to do with this album at the moment. I've noticed that, you know, it caught the Beatles, I think, at a moment when they were going from, you know, there was a certain amount of tiredness and fatigue had perhaps crept in. And I think that's mirrored in the track selection, which, considering how far on it is in their career, there's a lot of covers in it. But, you know, I do understand there's a lot of people out there who actually think the album is better than history has perhaps painted it.
I was going to say, in terms of we're kind of looking at his contributions. Would you still mark that one down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, No Replying, I'm a Loser, but it also has some very poor song choices. I've never been a fan of Babies in Black and Mr. Moonlight, but conversely, at the same time, and you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I Feel Fine came round about that time.
We would include that. By these rules, we'd include that, yeah.
Beatles for Sale, though, I think is a moment of transition. And then a bit like Kit, I've gone number 16, Let It Be, for much of the same reasons, really. I don't think it's a high watermark in his recording career. I mean, I do love Across the Universe in all its various iterations, but it's a bit of a reheat from the previous year and never quite recorded to his satisfaction. I've Got a Feeling, partly. Don't Let Me Down. Yeah, it's almost there, but not quite. You know, it does make a significant contribution to the overall album. I think the problem with Let It Be is that at that time, there were too many things going on, but he couldn't match Paul's prodigious output. I mean, Paul arrives at these sessions with Let It Be, Long and Winding Road. I mean, what's not to like? And for number 15, I've gone for maybe Walls and Bridges.
Oh, Walls and Bridges. Wow. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
You know, I think he described himself as the work of a semi-sick craftsman. I mean, the joy of doing this, Antony, is you go back to these albums and you find things in them that you'd forgotten about. I mean, tracks like Bless You and Scared are great, but there's a terrible melancholy about the album. Apart from, obviously, you know, Whatever Gets You Through the Night, which really did help to restore some artistic and commercial credibility. But I think the songs are just a wee bit downbeat, and you have to take into account all the things that were going on with immigration, with Yoko, with Lost Weekend, etc., etc., etc. So I think he liked it more than he expected, but it can't compare with some of his really tremendous solo work.
Wow. I'd just say one thing about the semi-sick craftsman. I don't think John Lennon is the best person to ask about his own work. That's all I'd say.
Yeah.
Lots of changing of mind. But no, very interesting. Did we get to 15? Was that 15?
Yeah.
Okay. So my 19 to 15, not massively dissimilar. I put Magical Mystery Tour 19th purely because there's only Walrus and Flying. I'm Walrus is in my probably top 10 Beatles songs ever. A lot of the credit goes to George Martin for the amazing string arrangement. Did a show about his best songs, and Jason Barnard, who did the show, was pointing out to me, because I always contained that Walrus's lyrics were difficult to say that they were great lyrics because they were nonsensical, but he pointed out some of the stuff like Semolina Pilchard was apparently a reference to Sergeant Pilcher, and then suddenly you're into social comment, and then it kind of changes it. Anyway, 18, I've got New York City. I'm actually quite a defender of this album. I was almost a bit surprised I had it so low. You know how context is a very big part of all this. The first time I ever heard New York City was I was in New York City in 2002. I'd heard a couple of the songs, but it wasn't an album I knew well. And we were staying at someone's house in New York, and they said, "Oh, what have you got there?" And I said, "Oh, I just bought this CD. It's John Lennon and Yoko Ono." They said, "Oh, I'll stick it on." And I put it on, and we just sort of danced the night away. I think it has another life as a sort of, not dance record, but danceable record. If you're at a party and you put an album on, you're not really listening to the lyrics. So all that stuff about, you know, sixth form lyrics that may well be valid criticisms, I think you can listen to it another way. And there's a sort of glorious imperfection to some of it. I mean, I think they should have fixed some of the vocals, like sync up terribly. And I like Elephant's Memory. They're kind of loose, sort of a street band. So, and I definitely admire them for trying to basically change the world. You know, I've got nothing but admiration. And we just did a show about 1972 a few months ago. And I totally understand why he dropped the activism as well. Because I think, you know, taking on the US government, you're not making your life easy, you know. And he was John Lennon to begin with, you know, with all the Beatles fame. So anyway, I hold that in slightly higher regard. Yeah, I mean, I love New York City. I like John Sinclair. But then there's stuff like Angela. Luckily Irish, like you say, Ken, is a nice song in itself. But, you know, when you've got lyrics about genocide, and of course it wasn't actually genocide. I won't go into that now, but with this jaunty Irish thing. I know he was sort of attempting irony, but I think as a tune that's nice, but then didn't really mesh with the lyrics. 17, I've got Rock and Roll. Again, there's great moments. I love Just Because, you know, the last song, Stand By Me. I love Slipping and a Sliding. You know, there's the performance on the Grey Whistle Test, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think because it's rock and roll, that's such a missed opportunity. And I think we know why it turned out the way it did, was that the sessions were such a mess and he went back in. I think one of the things about John Lennon that we've explored on the show is this thing where, you know, he did do a lot of drugs and he abused his body and his brain, but then he had the ability to come out of it and be a real professional. But I think in this case it kind of worked against him because he went in the studio, he produced it all fairly quickly, but it's just a bit muddy and it's a bit, I don't know, almost slick. I think it was a missed opportunity anyway. And number 16, just getting ready to duck. I've got Abby Rhodes. Now let me explain myself.
Oh, you better explain yourself, Anthony.
If you actually drill down to just John Lennon songs, all you've actually got is "Come Together," "I Want You," and "Because" as sort of standalone songs, and then "Sun King," "Me, Mr. Mustard," and "Polythene Pam," which I think worked brilliantly as a medley. But Ken, do you remember when you were on the show, we were talking about the reviews of Abbey Road? Can you remember the wording? It was something like, "Abbey Road will impress you, but it won't move you," or something?
Yeah, words to that effect.
Yeah,
There were a lot of negative reviews and mainly because Lennon's contributions were seen as pretty sparse and, not very creative for the reasons you've already outlined, or you probably will outline.
And it is true when I was going through the list, I was surprised seeing it in a list like, wow, he really didn't contribute as much as you think.
I mean, of course, we could go to, John Lennon's harmony contributions and John Lennon's guitar contributions, but then that's opening up another can of worms. So just compositionally, I mean, obviously Come Together is great. I really like I Want You, She's So Heavy. I know you made the point, Ken, when we talked about the lack of lyrics. I think sometimes you can get away with it because that's an exercise in saying, I want you. When he does that scream towards the end, like, yeah, I can't do it myself, but...
Oh, go on.
No. I need some preparation. I haven't warmed my voice up. But Because is lovely. Sun King, I think, sounds fantastic. It's one of the ones where with all these isolated tracks, and it's starting to sound more and more kind of gorgeous. And having lived in Spain until last year, I like those cod Spanish lyrics, particularly "que can eat it," which is obviously a double meaning of "que," the Spanish word, and then "cake and eat it."
Yeah.
Very John. I like that. I mean, I love Me, Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam, listening to them on the album. And again, with these isolated tracks, I mean, Abbey Road just sounds amazing. When you hear the bits on their own, it's so well recorded and everything. But I guess it's maybe lack of quantity there. So that's my 15. Oh, no, that's my 16. Sorry. 15, I've got Let It Be. I've actually moved across the universe to 1968, the original one with the sitar and everything, which I thought was a lovely version. So I haven't even included that here. But I think it went up a little bit because even though Dig a Pony and One After 909 compositionally may seem fairly minor, I think the way they performed them on the roof, to me, kind of elevated them a little bit. And as my listeners will know, I've been listening to the Nagra reels. You have as well, haven't you, Ken? I've listened to the whole lot up to the end of 25th of January.
Impressive, Anthony, and you're still alive to tell the tale.
Yeah. No, it's amazing.
That's impressive.
Can I just tell you my favourite bit of the Nagra reels? It's got nothing to do with this list, but just very quickly. The day after George quit on the 10th, I think.
Yeah.
And in fact, up to that time, they'd been trading songs, John, Paul, George, and they'd been encouraging George to rehearse All Things Must Pass, and they'd done like 45 run-throughs of it. So they gave that one a go. But it was on the day that George quit, they're doing Get Back, and Paul's actually sort of whistling guitar bits and telling Ringo, a bit of hi-hat and a bit of cymbal. He's really micromanaging ridiculously. And then George quits, and they spend the next 2 days just wasting time sitting around trading one-liners. It's John and Paul mainly. Ringo's not really, you hardly hear him really. But then in the background on one of those days, you hear a delivery man pull up, and he says, delivery for Mr. Harrison. And everyone just cracks up. Just the irony of it. And it's no big deal. It's just a delivery guy turning up. Just the fact they've got a package for Mr. Harrison who'd buggered off the day before. That was funny. Also, Alan Williams came in as well. You hear Alan Williams on the tape.
Yeah.
And I think he's probably flogging one thing or another, isn't he? Maybe the Star Cub tapes. But yeah, Let It Be, I'd kind of echo what you guys said. I'd say they're slightly elevated by the rooftop performance of the songs. I do love Ballad of John Yoko, and I do love My Name, Look Up for the Number for what it does. Yet another one, of course, with no lyrics as well. I think that was sort of John Lennon's laziness / experimentation. Which one do you think?
A bit of both, really, I mean, it is a throwaway. I don't think with any justification you could call it even Beatles canon. It's just a piece of both. It's just,
Cabaret.
Yep.
All right, Ken, can you give us 14 to 11? So your next four.
Yeah, for 14, I hope I get this right. I have gone for rock and roll, actually. And I try to take it at face value by revisiting it and being aware of all the shenanigans taking place in the background with Spector walking around studios loaded with booze and firing the odd gun into the ceiling, as you do.
Sure.
And to bear all the chaos in mind. But I do think it's got a nice vibe to it and quite a lot of spirit. I take your point about the muddy recordings in some of the tracks, But, I always felt that this was John going back to his unfiltered youth in a sense, and perhaps struggling and not quite achieving it, but trying to channel that spirit of his adolescence and the songs that really motivated him to want to become a rock and roll star. And I quite like the songs. I mean, and also what for me was an added bonus was somebody I've spoken to recently, but the idea of Bob Harris, interviewing him for the old Great Whistle Test, and actually been able to see him in the flesh at that time. He still had the long hair, and just to be able to see him singing these songs. I mean, Stand By Me is the great track, the standout track. But, I do quite like You Can't Catch Me and a lot of the Peggy Sue medley. I quite like the spirit that, he may not have quite got over the line, but you can't fault him for at least trying it. And I do take Kit's point when McCartney did his rock and roll album, it had a certain je ne sais quoi, shall we say. But for a moment frozen in time, I quite liked rock and roll. And I do take your point that you can almost see him walking off into an event horizon, walking off into the sunset saying, well, I'm going to take some time out now. I mean, nobody knew at the time. He probably didn't know it. But I just like the vibe that he captured in it. For 13, I've gone for Abby Rhodes, which could have come further down the list. You could revise this every 3 hours.
I did actually, yeah.
I blame you. I'm looking at you, boy. Abby Rhodes, for much of the reasons that have already been outlined. But then when you bear in mind that, if you're looking at contributions to an album, Come Together is probably nowadays one of the most played tracks of all the Beatles tracks on the radio. It still seems to stand up very well as a rock track on its own, thanks in no small part to McCartney's contribution with the bass line, which is probably the seminal element of it. But, songs like Sun King, we were talking earlier on about the lyrics to I Am the Walrus. I think you get away with the lyrics to I Am the Walrus in 1967. I don't think you can get away with the same hippie doggerel 2 years down the line when flower power has withered on the vine. But that said, Sun King is still has a certain something about it. Yeah. And I Want You, She's So Heavy, with all the different chord changes in it and the structural changes. And it's lyrically sparse. But we talked about this before, Anthony. I do think drugs stymied his lyrical creativity. And Abbey Road is a case in point. So is Let It Be. And he's clearly struggling to manifest some decent, lyrical work in that. Even Give Peace a Chance, for all it's a great track, lyrically, it's just a rap. It's the world's first rap. But, you can't ignore these contributions to Abbey Road, which, if you take these contributions out of Abbey Road, then you're left with an album which is half-baked. So you can't ignore even a substandard John Lennon composition is still a damn sight better than an awful lot of other things around at the same time. So 13 for Abbey Road, unlucky for some. Sounds like a bingo caller. For number 12, controversially, Kit, we have gone with the Beatles.
Ooh.
I almost want to gnaw off my fingers even after I read that. What? Are you mad? The only reason is that I think that the songs themselves haven't quite endured in the same way as some of the other great early tracks. Even some of the tracks on the first album, I don't think have quite had that same durability to them. I mean, it's still a great album, but it's almost like, and I think with the early albums, John is clearly the guy who's driving the bus, not just in terms of albums, but in terms of singles. You must remember at the time that came out, what have you got? Anthony, She Loves You's kicking around when that second album's out. So in terms of
that, I included I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy. That kind of up.
So when you look at the singles I think are much superior to some of the album tracks. I mean, It Won't Be Long, Not a Second Time are okay tracks, but they're not in the same league as what came afterwards, and they're not in the same league as the singles. What I will say is that I think You Really Got a Hold on Me, and this was Lennon's great gift. You Really Got a Hold on Me is one of the great Lennon vocals of all time. It's very hard to improve on the originals, and if there's one band could do it, it was the Beatles. And if there's one guy who could improve on the original, then it has to be John Lennon. And, You Really Got a Hold on Me. Was it Smokey Robinson and the Miracles?
Yep.
His vocal is off the grid. It's nothing short of sensational. And for number 11, I've gone for Magical Mystery Tour. It's a wee bit high up. I have to admit to a slight confusion because I'm old, Kit. I'm old. I can feel old age creaking in. And at first I thought you meant Magical Mystery Tour as an album. So
Well,
I'm
as an
now,
album, yeah, but just his contributions.
backtracking. I have to say, I Am the Walrus is one of my all-time favourites.
Oh, me
Oh,
too.
me too.
It's so surreal.
I'll tell you what, though. If we took the American Magical Mystery Tour, what do they have? All You Need Is Love.
It's got All You Need Is Love, Baby
Baby
You're a
You're a
Rich
Rich
Man.
Man.
But it's also got Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever,
Yeah.
has it not?
Strawberry Fields.
I think I included All You Need Is Love with Pepper. I mean, this can go any number of ways, but no, I understand.
At this point, I'm walking away in a fit of pique. Anyway, I've always
Look.
I'm the Walrus is one of the genius tracks ever. And I've just a very quick funny story. But like yourself growing up and hearing I Am the Walrus and playing I Am the Walrus kit in the back of the car or in the house and your very straightforward parents. And when it gets to that line about, boy, you've been a naughty girl, and every time it got to that line, I would try and cough and mask out the words as if they didn't know. I mean, give your parents some credit, Kenneth. But Magical Mystery Tour in it, da, 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 in at number 11 with the precursor of Can I Include Strawberry Fields?
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Knickers was too much for the BBC, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Oh, Knickers. No.
It killed me to put Magical Mystery Tour down that low because, I mean, I Am the Walrus alone could, rank high up. I love I Am the Walrus, and I'm like, but if we're ranking by albums, I'm like, Well, Ken, I think you will be very pleased with some of my picks.
Go for it. 14 to 11 then.
Okay. 14, I am actually a Walls and Bridges defender. I guess I kind of like the confessional aspect of it, and it is melancholy. I totally take your point, Ken. But I think that's what I like about it, and understanding the context in which he created it, as you pointed out. I think that's kind of what I like about it. Of course, you do have to hit whatever gets you through the night, but what you got, not only a great rocker, but lyrically, he's pretty much describing what he was going through. That's kind of a summary of the Lost Weekend. He's partying, but it's kind of empty. Scared is another one that's a track of what he was going through. And Bless You is beautiful. Beef Jerky, just a fun rocker. I mean, it isn't all depressing. There are some nice moments like that. And I just have always, appreciated it for what it was. And so I think it's got a nice combination. Oh, and Number 9 Dream, of course, which is another hit that I don't know if you hear it as much on the radio as you used to, but you used to hear it a lot. It's got a little bit of everything on it. It's got some rock, it's got some ballads. And then, of course, you have the cover Ya Ya. I mean, it may not be one of his all-time most consistent albums, but I've just always really appreciated it. So I put it there. Number 13, With the Beatles. I agree with you. I love With the Beatles. I call this album their R&B album.
Lots of energy.
It has such energy, and it's got such soul. And I completely agree, Ken. I think this really shows, first of all, John growing as a songwriter and showing what a powerhouse vocalist he was. As you said, his cover of You Really Got a Hold on Me, and how about his performance on Money? Come on. I mean, that's incredible. I remember the first time I ever heard this, and I was a teenager in the 80s. That made me sit up and take notice. Unbelievable. Please, Mr. Postman. I mean, his cover on that, too. Oh, I mean, just incredible. But then, as if that weren't enough, it won't be long. I think, he really showed from an early time that, he knew this sounds very calculated, but he knew how to write a hook. And I think it won't be long, may not have been, a big hit or anything, but I've always thought it should have been.
Why didn't they play it live? We talked about that when you were on the show last year.
Yeah.
Why is there not a single live recording? I don't understand.
I don't either. It should have been, should have been a hit. All I Gotta Do, that's a great one too. And then we're throwing other things in here, This Boy. I mean, the 3-part harmony on that. I mean, it's just incredible. So you really see... Yeah. So you really see him not only as the amazing vocalist he was, but he's already forming his songwriting techniques here and showing that he's just got the chops to become a first-class hit songwriter. Number 12, Abby Rhodes. We were close, Ken. We just reversed the...
Yeah, but very close, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, we just reversed the numbers. So Abby Rhodes, yeah, I mean, even though he didn't contribute as much as Paul did, certainly on that album, his contributions were very important. I mean, Come Together, as you said, that is a classic song of his. You still hear it. People still associate it with him, so you can't deny that. I Want You, She's So Heavy. I have to admit, Anthony, I don't like it quite as much as you do, but it's a very important song. I mean, it is sort of a precursor to, well, maybe not precursor, but certainly an early example of, heavy rock, heavy metal, the whole ending with the white noise. I mean, that was certainly different. Yeah. So that's an important track. Because is a wonderful song, too, that Yoko helped him with. And then as we've talked about, his contributions to the medley, Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, Puffy and Pam, they're all a lot of fun. So, he may not have been as prolific as on some of the other albums, but what he did do was essential. And as you said, if you took those songs off that album, would it have been as effective? That's a good question.
Well, Paul might have had another 4 or 5 hits in his pocket, though. We don't know, do we?
Yeah.
It's possible.
Actually, the one who might have had hits in his pocket would have been George Harrison.
Sorry, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Well, you proposed, Ken, didn't you, last year? If you took off perhaps Maxwell Silverhammer and possibly Oh Darling, and you had All Things Must Pass, another George song, so they had kind of 4 each or whatever, it would have been even greater, yeah.
It's very, very hard to get past the Lennon-McCartney barrier, in a sense. And I understand why, but it's a moot point.
That's true. And then I just want to throw in with Abby Rhodes. Then, of course, Give Peace a Chance. I kind of threw that in.
Yeah, Cold Turkey. I forgot about
Cold Turkey.
I probably would bump it off a bit, but anyway.
Yeah, well, and I like Cold Turkey. It's quite different than the Abby Rhodes material, of course, but I mean, that's an incredible track still. But I just, always wonder, though, what the reaction was from fans when that first came out. It must have been, I mean, people must have been scratching their heads, to say the least, when that came out.
I think also is what the reaction was when he presented it to the other 3. Is a story, that he said something along the lines of, I've written the next hit single, lads. And the colour drained from McCartney's face, and George looked at his shoes, and Ringo kind of... And I don't think it was because they didn't like the track, but they didn't think it fitted the Beatle brand. I mean, Ringo played on the recording eventually.
Yeah, of course,
He hated it that much, but it's not really a Beatles track, is it?
Oh, I can just imagine Paul's reaction. I can just imagine the colour draining from Paul's face. Oh, to be a fly on the wall. Oh, my God.
I'd liken it a bit to George bringing in Hear Me, Lord. It's almost like it's too much of his thing.
Yeah.
Cold Turkey was obviously, I mean, I'm presuming the expression Cold Turkey was out there anyway. More than one of my students have asked me what the origin of it is, and I can't find anything definitive.
That's true.
He never actually admitted that it was to do with heroin withdrawal. He said it was to do with one day it would either be a sandwich, as if, and then it was something to do with recovering from the flu. Come on.
Yeah.
We're not buying that one. All right, where are we up to?
One more. I think I'm up to 11.
Yeah,
okay, this is my turn to duck my head now. Tough call, but the John Lennon 1980 album. Now,
we'll fancy and Milk and Honey together.
Yes, exactly. Now, this was really tough. I know there are a lot of wonderful songs on here, but again, I had to go back to, were they innovative? Were they groundbreaking? And as wonderful as, I mean, Beautiful Boy, Woman, Just Like Starting Up, they're wonderful songs. I don't know if I could quite classify them as being like a leap forward or anything like that. 1980, I mean, they were at the time slapped with the adult contemporary label.
Oh, right.
They were. And they are a little of that sound. As I said, I love them. But by my criteria, I had to have it just outside the top 10. And this killed me to do it.
I'm pleased, though, that we come up with different lists because we've got slightly different criteria. Because I went with, like I said, the number of good to great songs. And this one came up with quite a few. But I think I do like the Milk and Honey ones quite a bit.
There's some wonder. I mean, I love I'm Stepping Out, Nobody Told Me. I mean, I would have loved to have heard what would have come out of Milk and Honey. I mean, like Finished and other tracks, because it sounded like it would have been more modern sounding than Double Fantasy. Yeah, that was so hard.
Yeah, it's all tricky, isn't it?
It really is.
When you both selected with the Beatles, I'm wondering where you've got Please Please Me. Don't tell me now. But I've got 14 Please Please Me. This is very tricky because I've got the song list here. I mean, you've got Please Please Me, obviously the song. I really like Ask Me Why. A lot of people would consider it minor, but there's something quite heartfelt about that. There's a Place. And then he belts out Anna, which is a great cover. Twist and Shout. When I heard the vocal of Twist and Shout when I was 13 or 14, I think I actually first heard it on Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Which should be true of a few people of a certain age. You know, because I grew up... I
don't like the fact that you two guys might have been teenagers in the 80s. I don't like this at all.
I was 11 when it came out. Only 11. No, but I kind of got into the Beatles late 80s. So mid 80s, I was listening to what was current then, which would be stuff like, I don't know, Duran Duran, U2.
Yes.
Stuff like that. And although I like 80s music now, songwriting-wise, there was nothing like Twist and Shout. This was like, what is this guy doing? Like this raw sound. So that kind of had a huge effect on me. And then, you know, you put in She Loves You, I'll Get You. But I think I've got it just below, well, a bit below With the Beatles, because I think With the Beatles was a bit of a progression. But, you know, with all of these, there's nothing I don't like. I mean, I quite like Sometime in New York City, and that's at the bottom. So this is really least good rather than worst. 13, I got Mind Games. I bumped up a little bit because it's a full album, and I think half of it is pretty good. Funnily enough, Kit, I just had Al Sussman on. It hasn't gone out yet, but he named it as his favorite John Lennon album, which was interesting.
Really?
Yeah. I think it's the most one note of his albums. You know, and there's nothing wrong with doing conventional pop songs at all, but it's the least experimental thing he ever did, I think. And it's not bad. I mean, I just echo what you guys said earlier, basically. Number 12, Getting Ready to Duck. Sgt. Pepper. Oh, this is so hard. I might even change it. No, I'm not going to change it.
Too late.
Too late. While you were talking, Kit, actually, I came up with a boxing analogy. I know that Ken knows a lot about Muhammad Ali, but you know Muhammad Ali used to fight Joe Frazier.
Yep.
Muhammad Ali didn't have a hard punch for a heavyweight. So he would jab, 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 and he'd hit Joe Frazier 10 times in the face with a jab, and then Joe Frazier would whack him with a left hook. And Joe Frazier's left hook almost had more impact than the 10 jabs. And what we're talking about here with certain albums, that's why I've got the Beatles ones ranked pretty high, and I think you guys have as well. You know, just 2 or 3 John Lennon punches could make a whole album, you know.
Yep.
I think there's a bit of that, but with Sgt. Pepper, what we got here? I mean, yeah, I'm already almost changing my mind because you've got Strawberry Fields, Lucy in the Sky, and Day in the Life. I consider Strawberry Fields, Day in the Life, and I'm the Walrus as the 1967 Holy Trinity because I put those 3 way up there. I think Lucy is great. I think it's very much pegged to its time, and I like some of the imagery, but perhaps it's a tiny bit on the nose. I don't know. And then, of course, he's not, again, he's songwriting-wise, he's not on a lot of the album. I don't think there were too many co-writes, even though I used to have writing sessions. I think they co-wrote with a little help from my friends. Maybe not 50-50, but there's not too much of him on there. And then if you add, depends if you add All You Need Is Love and Baby a Rich Man to Pepper or Magical Mystery Tour. I'm a huge fan of both of those songs, so there's plenty of quality there. But when I think of Sgt. Pepper, I look at the pictures of John Lennon. He just seems so tuned out. You see pictures where he's got this sort of stare on him and, he'd sit there transfixed for hours. So I think his contributions were, I think when he was into it, they're great, but then he kind of stepped away,
Part of the problem might be, Anthony, because if he's taking copious amounts of LSD and his ego is on the floor because the whole idea is to destroy your ego, then, he's got no great self-confidence. His self-esteem is through the floor. And perhaps that contributes to his overall mood. McCartney at that point, I don't think had quite got into to the same extent. And maybe that's why John is so passive on Pepper, because he's got no zip, no sort of get up and go. And he's just at a moment where he's a hippie avatar, but he doesn't want to be a hippie avatar. And the drugs are just eating away at his psyche. And perhaps that's reflected in the songwriting.
Good point.
We just did a 2-parter on that brilliant book, Riding So High.
Yeah.
And we talked at length about all this kind of thing. Yeah, that he actually set out to destroy his ego. It wasn't even a byproduct of LSD, the amount he was doing really would have killed a lot of people. I mean, he was very lucky he survived, to be perfectly honest. You know, he could have easily...
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, even allowing for the exaggeration of, I must have had 1,000 trips. Well, if you'd had 1,000 trips, I don't think you would have survived. But, you know, it's not difficult to see the ones who didn't. The Sid Barretts and the Peter Greens of this world, you know.
Yep.
It really just messed them up.
That's right.
I mean, according to Barry Miles, and I think John Dunbar hasn't really talked much. I mean, he'd have a story because he did lots of LSD with John Lennon. But I think he was doing it almost on a daily basis for a while. Obviously, we know he only ever did it once in the studio, the famous Getting Better story. But even if he isn't doing it in the studio, the effect is going to be there. So I think, you know, 2 or 3 great moments. Strawberry Fields is just amazing. But again, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, the more I research all these things, the other guys' contributions do mean a lot. The Mellotron and the George's Swar Mandela, whatever it's called, that. Ringo's tribal drumming, you know, it's... Part of me kind of thinks that perhaps they contributed a little bit more to John's songs than vice versa. But I'm sure there'd be arguments the other way for sure. But yeah, I think Sgt. Pepper was just a bit too tuned out. And when he was there, it was great, but he wasn't there enough. 11, I've got With the Beatles. Again, very impressed. What you were saying, Ken, about covers, if you go back and listen to a lot of these, if you listen to Barrett Strong's Money, it's a very dancey. It's like, money, don't get everything, it's true. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
But it's very light. I mean, it's got none of the... When John Lennon sings I Want to Be Free, you know, he's really like... He's got that scream in his voice. And, you know, if you listen to Chuck Berry's rock and roll music, you know, we'll get to Beatles for Sale a bit later, but, you know, it's a bit genteel, to be honest. You know, they hear that rock and roll music. It's a bit like that. You know?
I don't think anybody sang these songs better than Lennon. I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he was never St. John for all sorts of reasons, but... You know, his vocal prowess is undeniable. You know, it's difficult to compare and contrast vocalists because everybody, you know, it's what you like and what you don't like. But, you know, some of these early covers, you mentioned the ones in Please Please Me, they are just rip-roaring sensational. And I can't think off the top of my head any of the other great male vocalists. There's been some tremendous female vocalists. They wouldn't maybe sing full-throated rock and roll, but they can certainly sing great cover versions of songs. But in the context of John Lennon, I can't think of anybody who sings rock and roll better than him. I used to love Elvis's early stuff. You know, I saw the comeback special the other night. He is the sexiest guy I have ever seen.
Yeah. We just did a show about that. Yeah, we said exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Incredible. And without Elvis, there's nothing. But, you know, John Lennon singing these songs, these early Barrett and Strong covers.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Exactly. And these covers, they take the original and kind of turn them into something else. I mean, they really put their own spin on it. And, you know, something like Please Mr. Postman, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, you know, taking a girl group song and then, you know, and making it kind of sexy the way John sings it. Just amazing. As you said, nobody sang these songs like John.
I mean, if you could take a time machine, Kit, and you go back to the cavern in 61, for example, right? And you're there in this sweaty dungeon, and there's John Lennon singing something like Twist and Shout or Money, or even one of the great tracks that they never released, Soldier of Love.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you would be dumbstruck. You would be open-mouthed. Yeah. Wow. And unfortunately, I think that when they became famous, people were deprived of that. Yeah. I mean, until you get to the Toronto Peace Concert album, when you hear him singing it in a live setting. But when he's a young, hungry, visceral rock and roll star in the making, and he's got nothing better to do with his time other than to belt out those legendary rock and roll songs. I mean, can you imagine being in that setting and listening to him? Even Paul, it has to be said, but nobody sings these songs like Lennon.
That's for
sure. I'm a great fan of Roger Daltrey. I'm a great fan of Robert Plant. I think Daltrey could arguably in some ways match Lennon in terms of the quality of his singing. But at that moment, as Anthony was talking about, at that moment in time, Twist and Shout and Money, they are unmatchable.
Can't beat it. Absolutely.
Okay, the good news is we haven't been kicked out of Zoom yet.
Yeah.
The bad news is we've done an hour and we're about halfway. Anyway, that's fine. And there we shall leave it, just on the cusp of our top 10 selections, which will naturally be in part 2, which will be coming soon. Just a few comments about that. I was pretty surprised how low both Kit and Ken had Walls and Bridges, And Kit actually said, as you heard, that she was a defender of that album, which makes me think that the general perception of that album is that it isn't a great one, which I always thought it was. I mean, some things with John Lennon's canon, it's pretty clear that, for example, that the first two albums, which will inevitably figure on all three of our top 10 lists, are very well regarded. Sometime in New York City, of course, isn't. Mind Games is regarded as not great. And then perhaps Walls and Bridges and Double Fantasy / Milk and Honey are the ones which divide opinion, I suppose. But as you'll hear next week, Walls and Bridges is pretty high up in my list. Partly, it has to be said, because it's a full album, and I did give extra points to the complete albums. I had Sometime in New York City very low down, but as you heard me say, with my anecdote about hearing it in New York, I think perhaps it's the activist side of me, and I was involved in that for a while in London, and I guess on the internet as well, to be honest. I really admire what they were trying to do there. But I actually think the music wasn't bad at all. I guess I've already made those arguments. It was low on my list really because of the competition. My Joe Frazier analogy, which will be continued and expanded upon, you'll be delighted to know, in part 2, kind of holds true that his Beatles stuff, even if there isn't much of it, is so powerful. I mean, all three of us said after the recording that we would have liked to have changed our list, or we were almost changing it during the conversation. And I had Sgt. Pepper really low, as you heard, number 12, I think it was. And then I immediately, through the boxing analogy, taught myself out of that why it should be a bit higher. So really the point of it was to have a great discussion and to come up with interesting insights. And of course, I was genuinely excited to hear what Kit and Ken's lists were. We didn't confer at all before we started. And yeah, stuff like Walls and Bridges, very interesting. Another thing that flashed through my mind while I was editing part 1, I was talking about Twist and Shout, and that in the 80s there was nothing that sounded anything like as raw as Twist and Shout. And I suddenly thought of Bono, the young Bono, and U2's 80s output, and the song Pride in the Name of Love, which again I won't do an impression of it now, but if you haven't heard that song, it's a good one. And that had kind of the John Lennon delivery, but I think the John Lennon delivery had that sawdust element, that real kind of larynx tearing quality to it that even the young Bono couldn't really match. The other thing was about Magical Mystery Tour. Now, Kit and I had it right at the bottom of our list because there was only I and the Walrus and Flying. Ken had it a bit higher, and I blame myself, in fact, because I think I confused both of them in preparation for this. I think I was confusing myself as well. I said originally that we were going to consider the American iteration of Magical Mystery Tour, and I think a lot of British fans are not really great fans of the American setup in the sense of having less tracks, putting lots of the famous Alan Livingston Echo on it, and then putting out more albums and giving them different names. But I think most fans would agree that the Magical Mystery Tour album package that came out in America, which was basically the EP plus the singles of that year, which would be Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, All You Need Is Love, Baby You're a Rich Man, and Hello Goodbye. That's a pretty strong album. And I think I said to Kit and Ken we were going to consider it as American album, and at the last minute changed my mind. So that was the reason for that confusion. But anyway, I think when we get to the top 10, it becomes clearer. There's no muddying of the waters, and our favourites really do come out, as you'll hear next week. So that's it, really. As ever, please subscribe, please like, share, rate, review. It all helps. And I'll be back very soon with part 2. So thank you very much for listening. All the best, and see you soon. Goodbye.